Call to order. Welcome everybody, Grand Forks City Council special meeting, Monday, August 31st, 2020, 5:30 p.m. We'll take care of roll call tonight. Weigel. Here. Dockler. Weber. Here. Mock. Kwame. Here. Sandy. Here. Veen. Here. We have a quorum. 1.2, Mayor's announcements. Let's see. So as many of you probably know, we signed emergency order 2020-19 on Saturday. This order changed the closing time for liquor license holders to 11 p.m. This order does not impact the opening times, just the closing times. There's been some questions Saturday, so we signed a new executive order this morning, 2020-19.1, which cleared up any ambiguities from the previous one. This decision had been thought about internally and with the consultation of public health officers, and to include going down to Fargo, speaking with the White House Coronavirus Task Force, Dr. Birx, Governor Burgum. This measure was largely intended to stem the spread of the youths that have been our recent positives, generally intermingling in large groups between 11 and 2 a.m. in an attempt to eliminate different social circles from intermingling together. And that'll be in effect in the near term, hopefully. I want to thank Governor Burgum for organizing that roundtable discussion down in Fargo, and Dr. Birx for coming. It was about a 2.5-hour discussion on statewide response and a lot of good information. All right. Let's go to 2 awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations. We had a couple, we're trying to do more of a work session here, but we're going to get a couple things out of the way since we're all gathered here. 2.1, we have Allie Borgen's Smile Wide Day. So the proclamation, September 5th, 2020, and in perpetuity. Whereas Allie Borgen was diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 10 and ultimately lost her battle with this terrible disease, and whereas Allie and her mother Karen and her father Richard and her brother Dylan battled her disease as a family, as friends, and as role models, demonstrating the best of what people can be. And whereas Allie Borgen showed as much courage as anyone, child or adult, ever could, and in 14 years gave as much care and love as someone with 80 or 90 more years to give. And whereas her generous nature could not be daunted, routinely redirecting compassion towards her brother, her family, showing she realized how much they loved her and letting them know how much she loved and appreciated everything they did for her. And whereas January 2011, Allie, as Pippi Longstockings, and her father, as an unforgettable Shrek, held a party for more than 1,000 friends and family community members to raise thousands of dollars for cancer research, but more importantly, to spend a day celebrating, dancing, and laughing, enjoying each other. And whereas Allie proves that every person, no matter their age, has the ability to control their own attitude and can have a lasting impact on people by treating them with dignity, compassion, and strength of heart. And finally, whereas our community is blessed to have the opportunity to know Allie and carries her indelible reminder that despite setbacks we face, despite the heartbreaks we sustain, and despite the losses we suffer, we must smile wide every day. Now, therefore, I, Brandon Bochensky, Mayor of the City of Grand Forks, North Dakota, in memory of courageous and generous spirit of Allie Borgen, and in honor of the lessons she taught us about how to get the most out of each and every day, do hereby proclaim September 5th in the year 2020 and in perpetuity as Smile Wide Day in the City of Grand Forks. We have a recognition of UND Chesterfish Distinguished Professor Dr. Gordon Esminger, if I'm saying that right, on the receipt of North Dakota Heritage Profile Award. Been involved member of the Grand Forks community, served many years on the Historic Preservation Commission. We thank him for his time and dedication and congratulate him on receiving this award. I was going to ask Mr. Weber if you had some comments you wanted to make.
Dr. Gordon Eisenmenger has been a feature at the University of North Dakota and its history department for decades. It's amazing the number of public officials who have benefited from his classes, and thank you for making the time to honor him this evening.
Thank you. Looking sharp tonight. I also wanted to thank President Armacost, who's in the building tonight. Thank you for being here. Moving on to 3, this is public hearings and second readings of ordinances. We have no ordinances, so we'll have no second readings as well. And we'll move on to 4, discussion and work session. 4.1, COVID-19 overview and discussion. I'm going to call Ms. Bergerson up here, and I think we're going to go, after we go through A, B, C, and D here, I think we'll allow citizen comments first before we get into our work session, so they're not waiting around till the end of the night. Please take it away, Ms. Bergerson.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. We wanted to give you an update tonight on the city's COVID funding. What you see in front of you is a summary of all the COVID-related grant awards, expenditures, and money we've drawn down to date. As a refresher, citywide we have the state coronavirus relief funds and the FEMA assistance. Our transit, health, and police departments have received 100% federal reimbursement grants for COVID-related expenses, such as supplies, overtime, admin leave. Our transit grant is through the FTA. That one's unique in the way that it can be used for operating funds, unlike any of the others. The health is through the state of North Dakota, and the police department's through the Department of Justice. Finally, the Community Development Office has received additional CDBG funds, which has been allocated to nonprofits in the area to use for operations. And the EDA funds most recently for a new revolving loan fund. $1.39 million will be available for businesses affected by COVID to be used for loans, and the remaining can be retained by the city for admin costs to run that program. I'd like to focus the update on the coronavirus relief funds, as that's where we've seen the most activities and we've gotten some good news. Originally, all city expenses were submitted to the state and to FEMA. They'd both go through them. FEMA would approve what they wanted at a 75% federal reimbursement, and then the state would either do the match or take up what FEMA didn't cover. They determined that was not the most effective way to get city the money they needed. So on August 13th, they allowed for post-certified law enforcement payroll to be the methodology that they will use to get cities their funding. So what this meant is from March through July, we were able to submit all of those payroll expenses and benefits to be reimbursed from the state. Last week we received that money from the state. That's that bottom number on that column, about $3.6 million. As far as it relates to grant awards, those expenses are already spent, and that money can be used as the city sees fit. The Emergency Commission did ask that they use the money in a way to benefit property taxpayers, which can be in many different ways. It is important to note that $327,000 of that funds must be used for how the original funding source was supposed to be. Those expenses we put out for reimbursement for those different departments. We are allowed to do another drawdown for the months of August and September. I'd anticipate that to be about another $1.75 million. With that, I'll be available for questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bergerson. I think, well, I guess I'd like to thank our federal congressional delegation, Governor Burgum, and the state legislator for helping out. Provide some additional funding. We're definitely going to need council to get together and find the best place to use those funds to help out. So we'll look forward to working with everybody to get that done. Let's go on to 4.1B.
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yeah.
So this is going to have, I'm guessing, a very large impact on our city budget. Can we ask that sometime perhaps in the month of September that the finance department give us an update in relation to how this affects our budget?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to on 4.1B, COVID-19 dashboards. Michael Dulitz, I believe you have some other slides prepared as well, so please.
Mayor Boczynski and members of the council, I'm Michael Dulitz. I'm the opioid response project coordinator in normal times, and I've been working with COVID data as well as being a contact tracer for the public health department. I'm going to do a quick update on data, as well as try and answer some of the things that were brought up, some of the questions maybe that were brought up in the council meeting last week as well. So taking a look at our health officer risk score, the score for today, we have held steady in our overall score for about the past week. Our new cases had been on the way up the past 3 days. They've been kind of holding relatively steady around the 85 to 90 new cases per 100,000, and that's an average over the past week. Tests completed have also been very high, and that's been really kind of our shining area. We have been able to get a lot of tests completed, and that has helped with being able to identify the prevalence of COVID in the area, new cases, things of that nature. Average positivity has been increasing, unfortunately. It's at 7.1% right now, which has been higher than it has been in the past week. And then our percent change is slowly decreasing, as well as our overall trend is slowly decreasing. This is another way to look at it, our dashboard score overall. Again, to remind the council, the last time we were in the green area was still this month. That was on the 9th of August. And our percent change is starting to come down as the percent change is kind of getting used to being at the higher level. I just wanted to touch on this. The question might be coming up, what's it going to take for things to move to red, or what's it going to take for things to decrease? The most likely scenario, if we were to ever move to red, would be an increase in the percent positivity of tests. We've kind of maxed out, for lack of a better word, the new case score, so we're in red on that, and so any additional cases will not increase our score. The test score we've been doing very good at. I wouldn't imagine that to be changing at all to decrease. The percent change score will eventually decrease if we stay at this level with new cases, or as long as case levels start to level off, and the hospital score will probably likely stay somewhere around this level. And so the biggest area that I could see based off of the trend line of percent positivity slightly increasing would be that there would be potential increase in the percent positivity, and that could be the cue to move to red. The way to reduce the percent positivity is obviously by changing the denominator. So increasing testing would decrease the percent positivity, or decreasing the number of new cases identified would also, along with increased testing, would decrease that percent positivity. Likewise, looking at our path to yellow, the path to yellow is going to look similar. Looking at our percent change score and our percent positivity, if we can get our percent positivity down, that would move our score down. Our ability to test, identify, contact trace, quarantine, and get cases kind of moved through will eventually decrease that percent positivity, and that would be kind of the most likely factor to change in the near future. I just wanted to touch a little bit on hospital capacity, because that was a question that came up in some meetings this week. Last week all I kind of discussed was that hospital capacity we defined, and I didn't really discuss the methodology of how we defined that. So I did want to include the measure that I'm using for the inpatient capacity measurement. This inpatient capacity measurement is based off of the state's what they call VP3 guidelines, so protecting vulnerable populations, those guidelines. And so the state guidelines have 3 levels: Tier 1, Tier 2A, Tier 2B, and Tier 3. So Altru use those guidelines, and then they also added essentially like a Tier 1A, which would be the yellow status under Tier 1. So Altru right now is operating at a Tier 1 or yellow status, so that means that they have beds available, but they are getting close to their capacity constraint with the number of beds that they have staffed. So whether that be availability of beds or availability of staffing, they are a little bit constrained right now. And so an increase, like a bolus in new COVID cases would put a constraint on their system, and we may see downstream effects such as reducing capacity in other areas such as routine surgeries, elective surgeries, things like that. So that's why they are at the yellow. We wanted to have some sort of warning level before we got to orange, because when we look at the orange level, when we get to the orange level, we're actively adding capacity to the hospital, so we're increasing the number of beds. And I say we in a general sense. So the hospital would be adding capacity to the number of beds that they would be using, and potentially tapping state resources as well to fill needs, particularly once they got up to Tier 2B or Tier 3 as well. So this gives a little bit more opportunity for us to get some warning if things are changing. If we move into orange, that is definitely a cue for us to act. Taking a look at one of the charts that I've been providing you guys frequently, and that's looking at the new cases in Grand Forks County between May 1st and August 30th. Unfortunately, we also did have to have a scale change on this. We had another day where we hit our record in Grand Forks County with approximately 147 new cases, and that was on Friday. Fortunately, our numbers have been down the past couple of days. Today also looks like it'll be on the lower side. We're looking at around 20 based off of right now, but a lot of cases do tend to come in the evening. And we're also, one other thing to add to that is we're also starting to release individuals from isolation who were kind of identified our first time around. So our number of active cases, as long as we don't keep identifying new ones, hopefully should start to decrease some from this bolus. So hopefully, if I come back, I'll be able to report a decrease of some sort in at least our active case count. Looking at our Harvard risk level, again, we're very high and very clearly in red, looking at the Harvard Global Health Institute risk level. So we've been running in the high 80s per 100,000. Touching a little bit on the outbreak that we've been seeing the past couple of weeks, I just wanted to update you on some characteristics related to it. For the purposes of this, I did fully separate out the number of positives between April and August 18th. With the number of positives that we've identified since then, because it's been almost a doubling of our numbers in the community. And so it would really skew what we've seen previously if I left all those in there. So we are still seeing a very high rate of individuals identifying that they're either symptomatic or pre-symptomatic. So pre-symptomatic being they said they were asymptomatic when we first talked to them and then later developed symptoms. So 83% is very high, especially compared to the 68% that we had been seeing previously. Again, I want to reiterate that this is not a bunch of people who are asymptomatically spreading. These are people who are actually getting sick that are getting COVID in this outbreak. Testing characteristics, UND has continued to be the driver of tests in the area. UND has also made their testing events, some of their testing events available to the community as well. And so UND testing events aren't just for UND. We are also identifying community cases through those testing events. Looking at the spread type, I also had this slide last time around, but I didn't really break out where we were at previously versus now. Really, they're quite comparable in the spread type, looking at close contact versus household contact versus community versus travel. So we are staying relatively similar between the two groups. But again, this is designating the spread type is one of the more subjective things that we do as contact tracers, and so sometimes it can be kind of difficult to ascertain what type of spread led to that individual getting infected. I wanted to include this as well. This is something that I've been working on over the past week. Obviously I had to be very careful about de-identifying everything, so this is about as specific as I can get. This is what we've been able to do through our contact tracing efforts through the contact tracing that's been happening by UND as well as our state partners and UND partners. So I've identified about 4 index cases that led to approximately 41 UND students getting COVID, as well as some individuals outside of UND. Of those individuals, of those 41, only 2 of those individuals were asymptomatic. And then the different colors on there represent different residences and where they might live. Unfortunately, I can't go into a ton of detail on this, but I hope that does give you an idea of the amount of spread that we're seeing on campus and our ability to link. Unfortunately, because of the number of cases we've been getting, we haven't been able to do as much linking as we would like to. When you're working, with a relatively defined population, you should be able to do a lot more linking than we've been able to. But I just wanted to show an example of how we have seen the spread happen around the community. And as you can see, a lot of people are interlinked in a lot of different ways. There's people that are crossing all the way across the chart. It looks like they have a pretty defined social network, and then they have a friend that's on the other side of the chart as well. I also want to touch on COVID cases by age. It should be no surprise that we have been seeing an increase in the 10 to 20 and 20 to 30% age group as the percentage of overall COVID cases. This is July, and then this is August. So the 10 to 20, 20 to 30 age groups do represent a significant amount of the COVID cases in the community, but we cannot forget that cases are happening in other locations as well. I want to touch on this just to kind of preface the discussion that Mayor Bochensky will have on the next point, looking at the new and active cases in individuals greater than age 60. And so this is similar to the chart that I showed earlier, looking at the community as a whole. Do want to warn you that the numbers on the left side, so the left side of the chart, that number is a lot lower than the chart I showed previous. But what this kind of tells us is that there aren't a ton of individuals over the age of 60 getting COVID in the community, but they are staying on isolation for a significant amount of time. Is the kind of the conclusions that I drew from this. We have about 12,000 individuals in the Grand Forks County area who are over age 60, and that's why I use the active cases per 10,000 population. And then comparing North Dakota metro areas, Grand Forks has significantly increased in comparison to the other outbreak area, which is Burley Morton. Ward County has seen some increases related to Minot State. Cass County has stayed relatively flat, but they have had some increases as well. And they do have a university as well, and they've seen a small amount of impact from there. Burley Morton does continue to see increases, but in relation to us, we've kind of blown up the scope of the map. And then North Dakota overall, and I wasn't able to get an update for the rural Grand Forks area. And then comparing new cases, so this is a weekly look at new cases per 100,000. Grand Forks has again had a significant increase when we compare it to Ward, Cass, Burley Morton, and the state as a whole. Active hospitalization rate, so this is just new hospitalizations and new cases. That's continued to kind of stay relatively correlated. Again, this is just a correlation, so you can't infer causation based off of this, but they have stayed relatively close. And I did want to compare a couple of states, so this is the part where I wanted to answer some of the questions that were brought up at the meeting last week, at the committee of the whole meeting. So comparing North Dakota to our neighbors, and then I wanted to touch a little bit on other communities that are of similar size to North Dakota and have universities. So looking at Minnesota, Minnesota has stayed relatively flat. They've been reporting out record numbers of cases, but that record number is a lot lower per 100,000 than what we have been seeing in North Dakota. Looking at South Dakota's also been seeing a pretty significant increase, and a lot of that has been related to university communities as well as the western side of the state, the best I could tell on a quick look. And that number's covered up, but that's 26.4 per 100,000 compared to 30.7 per 100,000 for North Dakota. Montana has stayed relatively flat as well, so they still are approaching, relatively record numbers, but they are staying relatively flat. And then looking at some of the universities, comparing universities, so Story County, Iowa, that's where Iowa State University is at, and the story is similar when we look at University of Iowa as well. They've seen a pretty significant increase in the number of new cases identified per 100,000. And then the website that I use to try and compare all of the rates on as best of way possible is a website called COVID Act Now. And they use an indicator that kind of falls into the epidemiology world, looking at the R rate. So that's the rate of spread for an infection. So what we call an R naught. So that's the rate of spread if we do absolutely nothing. So the R naught for COVID is between 2 and 4. So if we don't do anything, COVID generally, a positive COVID case generally spreads to between 2 and 4 people before they quit being actively infectious. And so a good way for an individual or policymakers to get an idea on how their actions are working is by using the derived R rate, so the derived rate of spread. And so that's what some jurisdictions do use, particularly in Europe, but there are jurisdictions in the U.S. that use it as well. I have not previously brought it to the council because the confidence interval, so the confidence I would have in a relatively small area like here, was way too wide for me to feel comfortable providing it. But as our cases have increased, it kind of fits in a little bit more. So looking at Iowa State, their infection rate is 1.79. So that puts them solidly in the red range. So 1.79 individuals are getting infected with COVID for every new case, and so that indicates continued spread. Looking at University of Nebraska in Lincoln, they've been seeing a lot more of a flatter spread. They have seen some increases lately, but they have had peaks at a couple other times. They're at 1.18, and then their infection rate is at 12.7 per 100,000. Missoula County, Montana, where the University of Montana is at, again, a relatively similar sized metro area. They're at 0.64 and 3.2 cases per 100,000. And then comparing that to Grand Forks, where this website had Grand Forks at 81 cases per 100,000, and the RT, or the infection rate, at 1.5. So for every new case, 1.5 additional are getting COVID as well. So just comparing different jurisdictions as well. And then I just did want to add that the American Enterprise Institute, a think tank, when they put out their recommendations, they said that the infection rate should be less than 0.9 for state opening. I just wanted to provide that as a context, overall context to the R rate, since I hadn't previously shared this with the council. With that, I am open to any questions. I also do have the slides related to the trends on the health officer dashboard, so I can provide those as well if they are requested.
I think if you want to make yourself available after we get through this, I'm sure we have lots of questions.
I have some questions now, if that's all right.
We're going to hold off to the end because I think it's going to be a long work session. So
Very good.
I think Mr. Doulis can stick around. So is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And we can bring that this presentation back up at that time?
Yeah, I think he's got it. Yeah. And then we've been with Mark Schill, we've been working on another dashboard to kind of give us an idea. I think originally the plan was to slow the spread and to keep hospitalizations down and protect the vulnerable. So we tried to develop another dashboard that would take some of those features into account. So here's the original one. This is the same one Mr. Doulis had shown earlier. And then if you go to 4, We've added the active cases above 60. I think looking at where the rates have been, the concern is that the young is going to, inevitably infect the vulnerable population, and then we'd be looking at overrunning the hospital. So we wanted to have a dashboard that could look at this out in front of it and give us an idea of where we were moving. If you look at our numbers right now, I believe we're at about 87% of the cases are between 15 and 29, and less than 2% are in the 60-plus age group. So we wanted to just present another dashboard, another look at how we're going forward and how we're protecting the vulnerable population. Thank you, Mr. Dulitz. Let's go quickly here to 4.1C. After Ms. Dockler's recommendation at the last council meeting, we did sort of formalize what was largely already happening within City Hall and within other public buildings, but we made a requirement for city staff to be wearing masks in common areas and in hallways. I think it's been working pretty well. Like I said, it was largely what in line we were already doing. I want to thank all the department heads and staff members, especially for putting this together. It took a lot of work to put all the different departments into one document, which you guys will see. I believe that's in there under this order. But I'd like to say that within City Hall and within City Staff, I think we've been doing a great job. Since March, we've only had 7 positive cases amongst 608 total. Employees, part-time and full-time, which it's an ongoing challenge, but I think it's important to note that everybody doesn't have the privilege to work in a profession where they can get work done from home and still provide for their families and still be employed. Police, fire, PSAP, inspections, engineering, public works, waterworks, public transit. The vast majority of our workforce is hands-on. They're getting dirty, they're interacting with the public. They're physically doing what they can to serve the community. And as part of this, we've got Fall Cleanup Week and leaf collection coming up. So we put together a couple of notes that we want to get out there for that. It's September 14th. We want to do this. I think everyone's hoping that this will happen. We're trying to do it safe and mechanize it as well as possible. So we're asking people to separate their items and place them out by 7 a.m., but I think it would be good if they were placed out the night before. I think that they can sit there overnight. And then we want them placed, if possible, get them away from fences so that they can come by and mechanically pick them up so it's not as much handwork. And it's cleanup week's not intended for large construction projects like tree removal or hazardous materials. And then department heads along here within their workspaces have their own mask guidelines. We've also allowed the library, the Alaris Center, and the courthouse, which have their own boards to make their own decisions, and we didn't want to micromanage there. We're fortunate enough to have a member of council on the library board and on the Alaris Commission, so we'll be interested to see what they come up with there. We still are asking public to wear masks when they come into the building, but it's not a requirement. At the doors, you can see our mask usage flyer, which is there. I still think it's important, as this being a public building, that it's allowed to be accessed by the public, and they pay their taxes. They should be allowed to enter the building. I think that's good for 4.1C. And then 4.1D, I think Todd and city staff has worked amazingly hard. Council had a number of questions, and we can go over a lot of that here. They worked really hard to get all the answers out to there and to put all the supporting documents in there. And I suppose with that, why don't we let citizens come up? It looks like there's a number that want to make some comments, and we'll really get down into our work session here after that. Who wants to go first?
My name is Scott Reinhardt. I'm with Integrity Fundraisers. I own a local business here in town. I've been doing it for 20 years, and this COVID thing has we've almost lost everything with it, and we're just barely hanging on by like a thread. So I'm just got a couple of questions. Is with the UND I know there was like 41 cases at UND. How many of those ended up in the hospital? Do you have any idea? Any idea how many people ended up in the hospital?
I'm not sure, I don't believe that we have any hospitalizations right now in the state for the 20 to 29 age group, but I'm not sure. So I think that would cover that group unless they were,
Okay.
I'm not sure what 15 to 20, but it would cover a large majority of that, yeah.
So when this whole thing started, I was told that we're supposed to just flatten the curve so we don't overwhelm the hospitals. But, and then the goalpost keeps getting pushed back. No, it's until we don't have basically any cases out there. It's a virus, it's gonna spread. But a lot of people, like I was talking to Dennis over here, herd immunity is always been the key to eradicating viruses. And when is this gonna stop? I mean, when are you gonna stop? I mean, there's gonna be cases, but are we gonna continue this until there's no cases? Or are we gonna continue this until there's a vaccine? I mean, where does this stop? I mean, I'm not gonna get the vaccine, there's no way. Every time I get the flu vaccine, I get the flu. So there's no way I'm gonna get a vaccine. So I really hate that. So where is this gonna go? I mean, you gotta put together a plan, but you can't continue locking us down. I mean, with the whole mask mandates and all that other stuff, it scares the hell out of people. Big time. And so that's what I wanted to say, is that as a business owner, a small business owner in this town, been doing it for 20-some years, I'm really frustrated with it. I work with a lot of schools, and because there's not that many cases in the schools, my sponsors are telling me that if they have just one case in the school, they're gonna shut everything down. Sorry about that. Get a little angry with my arm.
Just leave it, yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying, is that, I mean, there's gonna be cases, it's gonna happen, but I mean, how long are we gonna just continue this? Is it gonna be another year, 6 months, whatever, 2 years, 10 years?
Well, I don't think there's an answer to that, and I think nobody knows. And part of that is what we're working on tonight, so I hope you'll be able to sit around and see some of the ideas that are flowing here. I think if anybody had the answer for that, they'd be sitting pretty, but I don't think we do at this point.
So I just want to express the way I've been feeling, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor, Board. My name is Gwen Dolan. I'm a retired chemist here. Been working in Grand Forks area for 40-some years. My concern with further masking ideas is some of the new data that's come out from the CDC. I'd ask the board to seriously consider. They've already reduced the numbers of actual deaths for the whole nation, taking the number of 177,000, times it through by 0.6. Now we're at 9,216 deaths since COVID. Nationally, sirs and women. That's huge. That came out in the last 2 days. And then if you look at the drastic drop in numbers alone, it went by more than 10% in just this week. And then to institute a plan that you should have all your employees mask, all your employees institute something maybe they don't want to do. I think you have to seriously consider the new numbers, the new trends. And in lieu of the spiking numbers, you've got to look at your increased testing alone. There's been people walking around with COVID that didn't even know they had COVID. Now they get tested and they're notified of it. And the other is, you no longer die of COVID. You can, the possibility's there. But as he mentioned before, it is a virus, it's a mutating structure. Even the ongoing problematic with vaccines will be just that. It's not going to hit everything. So a vaccine, like all of our previous vaccines, aren't going to be perfect. But in lieu of the new information that's coming out in the last 2 days, I'd like the board to really seriously reconsider what is being brought before to make a mandated policy on masking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Baczynski. Board, I'm David Waterman. I live on Cottonwood and own a couple of businesses here. And I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to address you. Clearly, nobody wants anybody to get sick from COVID-19. We don't want anyone to get sick from anything. But that's not reality. It seems over the last 8 months, COVID-19 has developed it's a whole new industry. People are making money off of this virus, not because that was their intention, but a lot of people are now being paid as the virus continues. And at the same time that that's happening, a lot of people are losing their businesses around the country because of the reaction to COVID-19. The question isn't whether or not COVID-19 is a real virus. The question is our response to COVID-19 appropriate for the level of risk that it brings to us? And I have spent, far too many hours reading and reviewing papers that are written by doctors and scientists across the country who say it is absolutely out of proportion to the virus itself. As the lady referred, this is the article that came out about the CDC. 94% of COVID-19 deaths had underlying medical conditions. We know what they are. We know who is at risk for COVID-19. Everyone. But we also know who's at risk for becoming very sick. 90 to 95% of people who become infected with COVID-19 either won't know that they have it or they'll have such mild symptoms that they don't require any kind of additional care. For the people that get very, very sick, 90 to 95% of those people make a full recovery. I think it's important to know that as far as masks are concerned, doctors wear masks, surgeons wear masks. It makes sense that you'd wear a mask if you want to prevent a sickness from the surface. I spoke with a doctor earlier today. He said he always wears a mask when he's doing a procedure. But he said, but I don't wear it all day long. If you have somebody's chest cavity opened up and you say, forceps, you don't want your spit going into that man's chest. So that makes sense. Can COVID-19 be spread through droplets coming from our mouth when we cough or sneeze? There's a significant body of scientific evidence that says that the primary vector for COVID-19 is not the droplets. It's not even touching a surface and then having someone else touch that surface and eat a sandwich. It says that the primary vector for transmission is the very small aerosol particles, 3 microns in size. That's 3 1,000ths of a millimeter in size. And we breathe those in and out all day long. We're also exposed to viruses all day long. And they don't affect us if our immune system kicks in and knocks them out. I don't know the exact number of viruses. It's in the thousands. I think it would help us to grasp how to respond if we put COVID-19 and the deaths in particular in perspective. This is the latest numbers from the CDC. I printed it off their website just before I came here. And these are national numbers. Ages 1 to 4 years nationwide. That's a population of 15,962,000. 12 deaths from COVID-19. 15 to 14 years, out of a population of 41,075,000, there are 28 deaths. We shut down the schools, we stopped graduation. People that worked very hard for 12 years to graduate with honors had no graduation ceremony. They get a sign in their yard that says, "I graduated." But we had to protect them from COVID-19. So in the age category 15 to 24 years old, that would certainly include all high school seniors graduating. Out of a population of 42,970,800, the CDC reports 280 deaths from COVID-19. To help put that in a little bit better perspective, during that same time period, this is from February 1st of this year through the 15th of this month, 2,310 teenagers died from texting and driving. 2,310 teenagers died from texting and driving, 280 from COVID-19.
Mr. Waterman, you got to wrap it up a little bit. We've given you a lot of time.
Thank you. If masks worked, I think that we wouldn't see all the deaths all the sicknesses, all the cases, the number of medical staff who get COVID-19. I just saw the numbers, over 600 medical personnel who've died from COVID-19. And it says that about 31% did not have proper PPE, personal protective equipment. That means 9% did have proper PPE, and they still got sick and died. And they know how to wear the masks, and they get the good masks, not the cloth masks. They get the N95 masks. If masks worked, why is it that we're letting the elderly die alone, away from their families? This is not just a tragedy, this is a travesty. This is evil. Elderly people, I talked with a lady whose sister is a nurse. She travels around the country. She said elderly people in nursing homes are refusing to eat because they're not allowed to see their family. They're not even allowed to see the people that work with them without being fully masked up. And they have no quality of life anymore. We've got to stop destroying our country. We've got to stop this craziness and take a look at the big picture. I respect you all for what you do. But I think one of the most dangerous groups of people in the world is politicians who say, well, we've got to do something. We just have to do something without looking at the big picture. So I thank you for being here. I want to thank Mayor Bachensky for not mandating masks citywide. But I'd like to ask all of you to please reconsider mandating masks at all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have any other public comments? I can assume largely that we're on the same page for most of the public. All right, well, thank you. Appreciate that. I think now from here, it's really, I don't know, Brett, if you want to go back and start with you with, I know you had some stuff that you were interested in presenting, so why don't you kick it off with you, sir?
I don't, what I'd like to do first, if I may, is have some questions for Mr. Dulitz.
Yep.
Very good. And so if we could bring up Mr. Dulitz's presentation again and go back to the beginning. In fact, specifically, Mr. Dulitz, I'd like to start with the slide on moving to red. One of the really great success stories, I mean, here in Grand Forks, we've got a serious situation right now. But I want to avoid a sky is falling kind of sentiment, because there is some positive news and the opportunity for us to be proactive, even though right now we have to be also reactive to some of the reality. One of the places where we've been successful in the state is in terms of testing. North Dakota has been one of the lead states in the nation for testing rates, and you've indicated on here that we're currently at yellow for that one indicator on the public health officers.
We're at green.
We're at green. Very good, we're at green right now, yes, so this is good news.
Yes.
One of the concerns I've had, and I hope that it doesn't come about, but with public schools, with universities across the nation engaging in a buildup in testing, there is concern about supplies for the test, supplies for the labs, in processing those tests, etc. So this is currently at green, but one way that we could dip to red is if there is a problem with testing in any way. How are we currently doing? Do we continue to have good news on testing in terms of the response time once people get a test, when they get the results, and testing supplies, etc.?
So for the last UND testing event, we were seeing results back within, they've been sending down the first results after about 10:30, so they swab people in the morning until about 10:30, and then they send those to Bismarck, and those we had by the next morning, so it was less than 24 hours that we had for those results. And then the rest of the balance of the ones from the testing event came back by the afternoon, so it was still, for the most part, it was within about 24 hours in that instance. In other instances, it does get up, closer to between 48 and 72 hours. There's lots of, kind of things to consider, such as supply chain and things like that along the way. That's something that the state is very, very aware of, and they have been working on it, and has been part of discussions even today. So
that's a tremendous success story. It wasn't too long ago we were taking 5 days to get test results, and this has been a major priority of the governors from the beginning. So wonderful news there. Thank you. The other issue that could change us from orange to red or orange back to yellow is in terms of positivity score. One way that would go up is if we have more students coming up with positive results from testing. We hope that doesn't happen. Although for some time we've been expecting that was a possible or even likely scenario. In fact, I was surprised that our positivity rates shot up so quickly. I wasn't expecting that for another week or two. So we'll see what happens there. On the other hand, again, some potential good news. It's possible that there was a certain inevitability that as we had thousands of students return to Grand Forks from around the country, around the world, and engaged in aggressive testing, that we were going to see an increase in positivity. And now the university is doing a great job of making sure those students are quarantined and dealing with that. So hopefully we see those numbers come down. Also, we're hoping that the mayor's policy this weekend and ongoing efforts at UND will be successful. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks, as Dr. Wynn has pointed out, that will be telling whether we've been successful or not. So whether those numbers go up or down, this is going to be an important thing for us to watch in this community.
And just to clarify, a lot of the spread that has been happening after people have been in Grand Forks. There's been a small number of people who were infectious when they came here, and then the spread has been happening here. Whether that is, on campus or in their off-campus residence or other places in the community.
That's not good news. No. In fact, that would suggest that we need to think hard about what we're doing in terms of policy to slow that down. The last thing I'd like to talk about on this slide is the hospital score, the risk level. Indeed, this can change daily, in some cases even more rapidly than that, the hospital capacity. So it's a difficult indicator because it's a lagging indicator. We don't want to wait till we're red on that one, because then we've already lost the battle probably. So it's always been a problematic but important indicator here. There were a lot of debates upon how that should be weighted as the public health officers and yourself were developing this dashboard. On one of the following slides, you had you showed how the public health officers score has us in orange, but the Harvard risk level has us in red. Can we go to that slide?
And that number is based solely on the number of new cases identified.
Good.
And so that is one component of the health officer's score is using those same criteria.
Very good. So on one level, if we hadn't developed the public health officer's dashboard, we would simply all be at green for the state. The entire state, I believe, is still at a green level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we could have had the state's green level or Harvard's red level. So it's wonderful that we have our own local data now helping to inform decisions. Thanks for your work once again on that. One thing that I'd like to discuss is the ongoing concern about the number of students who are not just positive, but ill. We've known for some time that that age group is likely carriers, many of them asymptomatic. But here, I believe you told us last Monday that in Grand Forks, is it correct we have up to 70% of that population is actually symptomatic?
83% now.
Oh, 83% now. So this number is shooting up. That's concerning. Mr. Mayor, one of your expert panel members noted, I don't think we know enough about long-term COVID risks in younger folks to dismiss their infection rate. The positive cases in the 20 to 29-year-old group are just the tip of the iceberg, with many more being asymptomatic carriers. And the latest results clearly show that it's the young people who subsequently spread the disease to the older and higher risk people. So not only is it concerning that we have a spike in this group, but they're symptomatic. I have a research project going on. Half of the students on that research project are currently symptomatic, quite ill in quarantine. So we're worried about that. And this idea that young people don't get as sick, or that they only get a little bit ill, there seem to be some studies that indicate the potential. We don't know yet. We don't know a lot about COVID, but there's some indications that there may be long-term organ damage, long-term lung impairment. We simply don't know about what's going on. And of course, we do know that this population is working with children, working in nursing homes, working with those vulnerable populations. Indeed, among that population, we have an obesity rate of about 16%. We have a ongoing concern about vaping and some other behaviors. So this is a vulnerable population in and of themselves. Finally, you indicated comparisons between North Dakota and Minnesota and Montana. Both states, after kind of a rough summer, they're doing much better than the state, and certainly much better than our community. It's worth noting that despite some of the things that have been said, both of those states do have mask mandates, and their numbers in much better shape. Regarding some of the comments that we've just heard, Mr. Mayor, one of the great resources we have in Grand Forks is a wealth of medical expertise with the medical school here, and you've assembled an expert panel to help guide decision-making and inform decision-making. Now, it's absolutely proper to open these proceedings to public input. We should never not do that. However, to pretend that opinion is the same as expertise would be a mistake. So very quickly, the idea that there have been some recent reports from the CDC saying that masks are not proper. The most recent update from the CDC was August 27th, confirming once again, this has been their recommendation for some time now, the recommendation to wear masks in public has not changed from the CDC or the World Health Organization. That has not changed. There's lots of junk science and misinformation on social media, but the CDC, the WHO, Johns Hopkins, and multiple other legitimate recognized authorities agree on many things, including ongoing mask recommendations. Now, another issue that was brought up was this very important issue of droplets versus aerosol. Droplets being kind of the visible spray, spit when someone coughs or sneezes, and then aerosol, the finer particles that can hang in the air for a long time. A mask primarily, not only, but primarily stops the dispersal of that aerosol by the wearer. So when I wear a mask, I'm primarily wearing it to protect others in case I'm infected, but wearing a mask also offers me some protection from those aerosols. One thing that we need to consider, both in this current discussion, but also in our policy discussions to come, is that in an enclosed room like this, even if we're maintaining something sort of like 6-foot social distancing, we do not have proper air exchange. At least I don't believe we have proper air exchange. And so when we stay in here for an hour, 2 hours, or longer, those aerosols build up in the room. One infected person can begin providing enough buildup of aerosol. And in addition, it isn't just the amount of aerosol that one is exposed to, but the length of time that they're exposed to that. And so when we get to the city policy, I'd hope that we would consider that and discuss mask wearing in City Hall in terms of these aerosol risks. With that, I'll thank you for the time. I've got some other material later on that we can look at, unless this is a good time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just, Mr. Mayor, Mike, the COVID Act now R rate, what is the rate in Grand Forks? Did you have that on here?
1.5. And the R rate, there's a couple different methodologies for it. So this was using one that was developed in the United States. There also is one out of Charity Hospital in Berlin that is the one being used in Europe. I've tried adapting that for here, and it just didn't quite make sense. So this is the best kind of measurement of the R rate that I have on a local level.
And did you list the R rate for the state of North Dakota?
I do not have that on here. It's available though. I believe it's around 1.2 or 1.3.
I was going to say where that is. It's still greater than the 0.9 or the 1.
Correct.
Okay. And we don't know what, do you recall even for Minnesota what it is?
It's right around 1.1 roughly. I actually can pull it up here. Uh, 1.09.
So would it theoretically be our goal to get that down below the 0.9 or actually down to 0 at some point in time? But there is a point where you don't continue to infect others or expand.
Yeah, so if you're less than 0.9, then you're contracting the number of active COVID cases you have. So there's still spread happening, but it's contracting rather than expanding like we're seeing in Grand Forks County right now.
Okay, thank you, that's what I was wondering.
Mr. Mayor, Michael, on the slide that you were comparing the counties, you specifically said that you can't get the rural Grand Forks data?
I sent you the rural Grand Forks data. I just didn't have a chance today in preparing for this to update that. So I saw that was still on there, and I.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments from Mr. Dulitz? I do think we have a few other people on the call too. I think we have someone from Altru and a few other places if anyone has questions regarding that. Otherwise, we might as well continue working.
Yeah, if I could make one more comment. I was a small businessman for 25 years. And I can't imagine the frustration and the anguish that our local business people must be going through. Now, some businesses are doing very, very well, actually. Some businesses are doing better than before the pandemic. That's a few. Many of our small business people, I believe, are struggling. There's some federal programs, but in the end, you need your customers. That's what runs a business, is customers and revenue. And I don't mean to make light of that in any way at all. In fact, the work that I've been doing related to COVID on behalf of the city from the beginning has been on behalf of our economic health. We can't separate our economic health from our public health. We can't have one without the other. And one of the best ways, according to the expert panel that has been advising the mayor, to the reports I'm reading from the CDC and the WHO, et cetera, what I'm hearing from public health, what I've had confirmed by public health, is that one of the best things we can do to keep our businesses open is the simple act of putting a cloth over our face to protect one another. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
is there any other comments for council or proposals or anything else we're working on? I mean, I kind of thought this was going to be
Sure. Are we ready for
a longer
proposals?
night, so yeah.
Well, very good. I've asked that a presentation, a policymaker's guide. This is from Johns Hopkins University, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Center for Health Security, the Promoting Mask Wearing During the COVID-19 Pandemic, a Policymaker's Guide. Actually, if we could pull that up and go to the executive summary and begin there, that's the one-pager starting on page 2.
Councilmember Weber, is that the document I forwarded on to city council members?
It is.
So you should all have that in your email, if you want to just pull it up.
Is that not possible to pull up?
I think we can, but I'm just
We
saying,
can.
if you want to pull up on your,
Very
I
good.
forwarded it in and around 5 o'clock.
Right. And actually, while I sent that around this afternoon, I believe it was last Thursday or Friday, Ms. Swanson from Public Health Director sent this out. This is the source. So I'll repeat that. The source for this is from our Public Health Director. The key findings. There is scientific evidence that widespread mask wearing in non-medical settings as part of a comprehensive strategy to prevent disease transmission can reduce spread of COVID-19. It goes on to note that not all masks protect equally, that there are a different quality of masks. Governments should monitor community-wide uptake of masks, conduct social science research to understand differing rates of adherence, and assess epidemiological data to determine if the practice is having variable impact on subpopulations. There are different groups, whether that's the elderly, communities of color, etc. There's a likelihood that there will be different rates of impact. Evidence supports the effectiveness of mandates and policies that shape social norms and environments. I'm just giving kind of the highlight here. Widespread mask wearing should be promoted as a new normal that communities should adopt for the foreseeable future until virus spread is extremely low or vaccination creates immunity. And of course, hand washing and physical distancing and reducing or eliminating high-risk situations, such as crowded indoor gatherings without masks, are also critical to limit the spread of COVID-19. Council members have this. Let me ask, I don't know how much people need. I thought that it was fairly obvious at this point that there's evidence that mask wearing reduces COVID-19. That's discussed in the report. But perhaps we could go to page 5, best practices for mask wearing. With few exceptions, everyone should wear a mask when in public. This includes closed, confined places with poor ventilation, as I mentioned earlier, rooms such as this, and crowded places with many people. Mr. Mayor, you've mentioned several times that it's important for us to provide public education about when to wear a mask, but also you've mentioned when it's not necessary to wear a mask. For instance, if I see someone driving in their car by themselves, they might be wearing a mask. But frankly, if I'm out running errands and I'm going to 3 different stops, I might put on the mask before I go into my first stop, and instead of taking it on and off, I'll keep that on while I'm going to running the rest of my errands instead of taking it on and off. I think this is actually good practice because we don't know if it becomes contaminated, our hands. We should be using hand sanitizer in between those visits, but I believe that we'll hear that this is good practice as well. It goes on to describe multiple layers being better than a single layer. One of the things that I'd like to propose, Mr. Mayor, is that you're already meeting with our institutional partners on a regular basis. The three institutional legs of our community are UND, All True, and city government. I'd love to see us come together, and as UND has already done a fantastic job of producing masks, making those available to the population on campus, and providing education about that. We need to do that on a broad basis across the community. Help people understand why mask wearing is good practice, how to wear them, when to wear them, where to wear them. This is one place where we've dropped. So whether it's a mandate or not, this document is recommending a mandate. Whether we go with a mandate or not, clearly we need greater public education about why. Because there continues to be members of our population who either don't believe masks or even feel that they are harmful. I'd then ask that we go to page 7. This is where we discuss exemptions. There are some groups, some populations that should not wear masks. They're including children under 2 years of age, anyone who has trouble removing a mask without assistance, people with certain diseases, high-risk diseases, but otherwise, the recommendation is that everyone in the public should be wearing a mask when they're in public situations. Promoting mask wearing with policy is discussed on page 8. One of the important things for any policy that we end up with is that it has to be clear. We need to be clear about who's expected to wear when and how, that this isn't just limited to indoor spaces, that there are places on campus, for instance, when there's heavy traffic and a reasonable expectation of not being able to maintain the 6-foot distance, then masks are appropriate there as well. Again, I'm just trying to hit some of the highlights. This is a 16-page, I think fairly condensed and tight set of policy recommendations. On page 9, It can include some additional exemptions when people are eating or drinking. So you would wear a mask into the restaurant to your table. Once you're there, you wouldn't be wearing a mask. People playing sports or exercising would not need to wear a mask. People playing or practicing musical instruments, etc. Perhaps of most relevance to this group is the discussion on the bottom. Mask mandates should be issued by the most appropriate government authority. And it says the mayor or county executive may or may not have clear authority to issue such rules. We would want to check with our city attorney. But in general, policymakers should strive to set minimum standards that work for the entire community. And particularly important this evening and to the discussion we've been having, policymakers should also be sensitive to the public's perception of the issuing agency. The public should view the rules as evidence-based and not politically motivated. I believe that it's possible we had enough votes many weeks ago to pass a mask mandate. I avoided any kind of presentation of that because I feared that a mask mandate that was based upon a divided vote would further divide the community. I think that division is changing, Mr. Mayor, especially as our numbers are going up, and we have an obligation to move forward with some reactive and proactive policies. On page 10, local jurisdictions and businesses are expressly permitted to enact more protective measures. So whatever the city decides to pass in relation to mask wearing, our local businesses, grocery stores, would certainly have the right to impose more protective measures. But ideally, communities will widely adopt mask wearing requirements without the need for sanctions. And I fear that what we've been doing in the absence of a robust public education campaign from public health is that we have certain influencers in the community who lack medical expertise. And they are making the decisions and providing the examples that too many of us are following. Instead, as leaders being informed by local expertise, medical expertise, we should move forward with robust public education and appropriate policy. Finally, and then I'll stop for a little while at least, if we go to page 12, there's a description of why some people wear masks and why some people don't wear masks. This is important for us to be aware of. And then there is a case example of Minnesota and what's happened there and what their policy looks like. So to say that it's not possible legally to have a mandate, that it's not enforceable, again, we have multiple models to look at across the country. So with that, thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments or?
And I can keep going all night if you like.
Oh, we know that.
Mayor?
Mr. Veen, please.
I'll make a couple comments. One of the things I personally looked at is in my time in the council is some of our core mission, city mission. I've looked at, which I think are public service and public safety. We obviously get involved in a lot of other areas, but those are two things that are really core for what we're trying to do. And I think as we look at our population, what is it that we can do to enhance both those two, public service, public safety? Obviously, this pandemic is a big issue with public safety. And we need to, I guess, look at what we should, where we are at today, what we could and what we should do. What I've asked for quite some time now is if the city could somehow have a plan so people would know where we are today and what we might have to do as it gets worse, or where we might go as it gets better, but to clearly lay out at what points in time we may implement further restrictions or some type of plan for safety. Because I believe our goals are fairly simple. We want to manage the hospitalizations we talked, so we don't overload the hospitals. We also don't want to get our nursing staff and others in the hospital sick too. I mean, we really want to protect those people. We want to keep kids safe, and we want to keep them in school. We don't want to have something happen where kids can't go to school. We all think that that's very, very critical. Mr. Weber said, we want to keep businesses open. I mean, it's very important that it isn't just about the health, it's about businesses. We want to keep the vulnerable populations protected, as we've talked about. We want to keep daycares open so families can have a place to take their kids while they do work. We want high school and college extracurricular activities to happen, like sporting events. What does it do? What can we do to make sure that the kids and those people who have worked so hard to get to these points can actually play the sports that they want to play in? And another thing that Mr. Weber has talked about a little bit is maintaining the reputation of our community as a place that is meaningful for those that are here and something that we don't look down on. I'm very respectful of the long-term, or of the health officer's dashboard. I thought that was an extra, because, you know, we're going to be the policy makers. There isn't going to be one size that fits all, and it isn't going to just be the dashboard. I mean, the dashboard is going to be probably one of many of the things that we will put forth and use as a piece of the plan that we want to get together. Because my question would be, even if we don't do masks now, is there going to be a point when we will get masks? What do we know what that target, that tipping point is actually going to be for us at some time that we can at least have that in the back of our minds? I mean, we have to have some goals and some objectives here. And that's what I was hoping we could do even tonight, is get some start about what that looks like. There's some minimum things that we have done. I appreciate what you've done so far with the employees and going across, and the work and effort. That's not a small task to do the work that's been done to date, that's been done in the last week. And I think I would like to let you know we appreciate what you've done. I appreciate what the health department has done, and all the work that they've tried to do to give us good data. Because that's the one thing we asked for some time ago. What's the data? What are we going to use? We need to justify this out. And being an engineer, basically, I'd like to see sound data for making decisions, and not them be emotional or hearsay, and be able to have data that we can trust. So I think we've gotten a long ways toward that. I don't believe we still have the plan. I hope we could have a plan. I think we've talked a lot about the impacts of masks, the value of masks, and how that is going to, I think, impact the many areas where I said our goals are. That we keep these things open, we have some level of normalcy, possibly with the exception of wearing a mask. And that we can get back to doing the things we want to do. And the basics are still there. Wash your hands, physical distance, wear masks, do testing. Those things just don't change. So when is it that we go to another level on any one of those things? And the one that's probably the easiest, physical distancing, we try to do it. Testing, we're doing phenomenal on the testing. There's just no question about that. Washing hands is an awful individual thing, so you don't know what happens. But wearing masks is still one of the pieces that I think that's out there that we need to have a better discussion on and a better plan for beyond what we've already done. And take a look at that. So in the kind of the bottom line is we can be proactive or we can be reactive. And I think that's, as we raise the levels of what we need to do, that's reacting. And the fact of the matter is, can we continue to do things proactive so we don't have to be reactive as the numbers or infections change or are increased? Because it goes beyond I look at what private businesses are doing throughout the town, and that you can't go into many of them anymore without wearing a mask. But we will let them come into City Hall without wearing a mask. And that's something that I think we need to have some discussion on. Is that what we want to do? I'm thankful our employees are protecting others through the wearing a mask. Are we protecting our employees? That's the other aspect of what we need to talk about. So, thank you.
Yeah, and I think on that point, we feel pretty confident that we have engineering set up of spaces where the contact between public is very minimal at this point, and certainly allowing people to enter the public buildings that they've paid for while still making it safe. I think as a staff in general, we do feel pretty confident about where we're at.
Mr. Mayor, if you're looking for more specific proposals, and that's what you were asking for tonight, then let me propose this. Number one, we need a strong, active, robust public education campaign. It's been too long in coming. We're due for that. Not just about mask wearing, but about the COVID in general. Many of us live in this world and we're receiving updates on a daily basis, but it would be a mistake to think that everyone in the city has that same information. So number one, a robust public education campaign. Number two, I think it's important at this time that we maintain the public health officer's dashboard. I appreciate your interest in continuing to explore ways to make that dashboard more effective, including this interest and measurement of young people and their impact. That's not currently one of the factors being weighed, but this metric does not appear to be widely used in policy reports and other dashboards at this time. Therefore, it's critical for these assumptions and thresholds to be reviewed by local public health experts, epidemiologists, and health professionals. I think the exercise that you've engaged with Mr. Schill on looking at that factor is important work, and it should continue. But for now, we should stay with the public health officer's dashboard risk assessment, which we voted on and passed last week as the leading indicator for our decision-making process. And then number three, we should continue to analyze, with the assistance of our expert panel, the not just mask policy, but the risk protocols. We have these 4 different risk levels. What does it mean when we go from green to yellow, from yellow to orange, from orange to red? How are things going to change? Mr. Mayor, thank you for your leadership this weekend. It was a rapidly evolving environment, but we must provide the public and business owners with a predictable policy environment. We can't just be passing policies on an afternoon and enforcing them that evening. Not that what you did this weekend was wrong, but in the future, we owe it to the public and to business owners to have a predictable policy environment. Ideally, we would have been setting this up back in June. We should have been proactive back in June, but our numbers were low and there wasn't the urgency that there is now. So now we find ourselves in a situation where we have to react to the current crisis. We've gone from green to almost red in a very short period of time. That's as much of a crisis as we've had since March in this community in relation to this pandemic. Now, what I think we need to do, again, is work with our institutional partners, UND and Altru, and the state. We look to the state and the legislature for support for our physical infrastructure, roads, water treatment facilities, etc. We look to the state for support for UND, research funding, and other important funds to keep UND healthy. We can't neglect that obligation to the state. This is where the state sends their young people to be educated. We need to keep them safe while they're here and keep them safe so that when they go back home to their communities, they're not taking COVID back We can't be the source of infection for the state. So again, I think the ways that we do this, at least tonight, is we agree that we need to engage a robust public education effort. We need to maintain the public health officer's dashboard, and we need to take a close look at those risk protocols and decide how things are going to change in terms of policy when we go from green to yellow to orange to red, and not just in terms of City Hall, but in relation to the whole community. Those are my proposals for this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comment from council members? I think that's something we can definitely look at and start working together, and more to come. Yeah. Mr. Veen.
I think I like what I've heard. I do question, we need to do better education. It seems like we have a lot of education out there. I'm not for sure what it's going to take, but I think it's something that's worthwhile. The question is going to be, will they still believe what they want to believe, I guess, and that's going to be problematic. But I really appreciate your risk protocol as things change. The question is how much longer are we going to continue to go until we have that risk protocol known? What's it going to take to develop that risk protocol? Who needs to be a part of that? And what basis will we make that determination? And I think I was hoping that we'd be discussing some of that sooner rather than later, so that we have, good data to support the changes when they come. And I don't know, Mr. Weber, if you've had any thoughts about that. I would really like to know a little bit from the expert committee that you've been working so closely with so long. Is there any indication from them of what those change, or when we should be going from one level to another, and what that means? Because, actually that's ever changing. It isn't all of a sudden you go 1 point over and all of a sudden you change everything. It's actually a graduated scale that goes from 0 to 5, and as you go there, you got to have some point. I understand that, but as we get more and more into something, what's going to be the tipping point? Are we going to be able to decide that? And we need to decide that soon, because this could be impacting, like I said, the kids that are going to school, and we want to keep them in school. So it would seem like there'd be urgency to trying to develop that, and I don't know if we'll ever have the perfect one, but at least we need something.
Mr. Veen, Mr. Mayor, if I may. So the data for driving these decisions is the public health officer's dashboard. The public health officer's dashboard is not simply a color. It's the culmination of the leading indicators, weighted according to the input from the expert panel. The dashboard was created to graphically present available data to determine Grand Forks' specific risk assessments based upon these color distinctions. Nonetheless, and this is from the interim report that was presented to council last week, and again, I recommend that everyone read it. Policymakers should remain open to emergent information and factors. The resulting dashboard provides a valuable tool and pulls together available information for frequent evaluation by policymakers. However, policy should not be bound strictly by the weightings of the dashboard. For instance, if Altru Hospital were to suddenly find itself in a red posture, even if all the other indicators were less severe, this would probably warrant considering Grand Forks at red. So we can't be the slave to this dashboard. It informs our decision-making process, but neither the expert panel nor public health are responsible for making these policy decisions. Unfortunately, it's a handful of 7 politicians and their mayor, well, I guess 8 politicians now, Mr. Mayor. You're a politician as well. It's our job to make those policy decisions. But we have the data. The data is all of those factors that drive the public health officer's dashboard. Let me say that again. The public health officer's dashboard. This isn't my opinion. This isn't something that I cooked up in my backyard. This is based upon the expert panel that the mayor brought together and our public health officer. Thank you.
Mayor Buczynski, I think we're making, I think to clarify, it's really important. The health officer and working with the public health department created the dashboard that you're looking at. We've sought the advice of many people to include the expert panel, like with others. So just so you know, it's the health officer has approved this. It was created by our public health department as a further tool for you to use. We have asked others to take a look at it, but I want to be very clear. It was made by, we'll call it bureaucrats, okay? And so we've sought the advice, and that's very important, I think, for this group to know that, number one. I think number two, we're talking about the colors, okay? Right now we're in green because the governor sets the color and he says we're in green. Moving forward, the intent of the dashboard was to provide us a more focused color of kind of where we're at moving forward. And I think the governor has been very key to say there are heightened areas where we are probably in orange, but however, he looks at health, or looks at our healthcare system. It's not only all true that we should worry about the capacity, he looks at the statewide capacity. And just because Ultra on a day-to-day basis may have some capacity issues, doesn't mean they can't move that capacity to Fargo. There's lots of moving parts, and that's why that color is hard to nail down. But what he looks at is the statewide capacity. And so Ultra has an ability through their cooperative agreements to move patients. Hey, do less, let's move some of the patients from here to Sanford, and we're going to do that. So that's why it's a little bit nuanced, and I don't think we should think we're on an island onto ourselves on our hospital capacity. So really that was an intent for us to take a look at it. And the color codings, we want to know what the color codings are. Those are, whether it's bars, restaurants, whether it's exercise facilities, the list goes on, and we have that attached to this. Those are some of the similar things that we did. We are operating on green, but however, as a city of Grand Forks, we know there's a heightened risk that we have in our community. We're trying to work that way as a city of Grand Forks, and we probably, from a public education perspective, I agree, we should let people know, even though we're in green, we should be more really heightened on what we're doing, okay? Even under green, bars are only supposed to have 75% capacity, as I recall. That's an enforcement issue. That's a citizenship issue of making sure you're following the rules and the guidelines that are out there. And so I just want to make that clear to everyone. The tools that we have were created by staff, right? Approved by your health officer. We've sought the advice of a lot of people, but we take ownership of those tools, and we don't defer that to anyone else on moving forward on that. The color system, we can certainly do some other things, but right now we are in green, but our dashboard that shows it with the health officers, that we're in a heightened green, if you will.
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
Mr. Phelan, first of all, you say the word bureaucrat as though that's I have a great deal of respect for the bureaucrats and for the technocrats who helped develop this. And the expert panel had multiple reviews of that. And then last Monday, City Council voted unanimously that is to be our leading indicator for decision policy. So I don't believe that the governor's mandates in any way preclude our ability to measure our own local risk assessment. In fact, I'm very proud that I believe this is still the case. We are the only city in the state to have that kind of localized relevant information. And so with the decision of council last week, we are in an orange level in Grand Forks. The state is at a green level. We are at an orange level. That was part of our policy decision as I understood it.
Mayor Buczynski and Councilmember Weber, you did pass that. It was at a committee of the whole meeting, and so I think that needs to go to a city council meeting. But I think the bigger step and the more consequential step is that if we're going to say that we're in an orange level, does that mean, because right now we're saying we're following the governor's guidelines in all those different areas, and I'm saying not for the city of Grand Forks proper, but for all those small businesses in those areas. The color matters, and we probably need a further discussion on this on Monday when you approve that, and we certainly need to do some more work this week. There's consequences to that, and there are enormous consequences, and we shouldn't pay short thrift to that, because I think the governor's office and and his categories are well-defined. They're very well-defined, and we'd have a hard time coming up with a better system that they've done. But they're set up in a color system. But their color system was set up in a way where they had a different dashboard, if you will. We've created our own dashboard. I don't think we can say that's a one-to-one with how those colors are created. We created our own coloring system, different than the governor's. But the governor's system with green to red is consequential, and I think we have to have some deeper thinking if we want to implement that, because they're similar, but they're not the same.
And you're absolutely right. If that's the intention of the council, is that we're going to take the state's risk levels and their color coding and apply that to our community, it has huge ramifications, because it would mean that if we were to approve it in that way, that the decision is already, the details have already been worked out for us. And that's what we would be adopting if that's what we choose to do so next Monday.
Yep, and Mayor Buczynski and Councilmember Weber and council members, generally in orange, if you read those, and these are state guidelines too, we got to remember these, they're guidelines. You would have us close most of non-essential businesses in Grand Forks. If you look at the orange and the red level, most of the non-essential businesses would be closed, okay? And we would be back to what the governor declared. We would have, retail stores, things that are vital to our keeping people moving would be open still, but a lot of the elective things would be closed. The guideline would say you ought to seriously consider closing.
Can you make sure that that the council members, that we all have a copy of that? We need to be reviewing that between now and next Monday and decide if that is our intent or not. Yeah.
We will. And Mayor Buczynski and you and I in the department, we'll take another look at that, but it's pretty well put together.
In the meantime, we shut down council meetings in these chambers last March at a time when our infection rates in the community were much lower than they currently are. That was a city decision, is that right?
Mayor Buczynski, Councilmember Webb, those orders were by Mayor Brown. So all those orders, and when we shut down city facilities, we went to virtual meetings, including city council meetings, were all Mayor Brown delivered. And when Mayor Buczynski, I think due to some pressure with city council members, we then opened up city buildings to include these hybrid meetings that we're conducting right now. Currently, right now, it's with City of Grand Forks, we'll call it Inc. We're doing virtual meetings. You don't see a lot of department heads here, only the ones that need to be here. We've allowed the public to come here because we're open. So we're trying to do things on our own merits. And the mayor talked about all the services we're delivering across the board. Let's be smart. Let's make sure that we are kind of in this orange level. But I just want to point to those small businesses. There's consequences.
Mr. Sandy, you were the one who kind of led the charge to bring council meetings back to council chambers. I supported that, and I supported that in large measure because we wanted to send the message to let the public, to let consumers know that Grand Forks was actually a safe place to be. It was a safe place to go out and do business. And our infection rates have changed dramatically since that time. So that's another specific policy decision that we need to consider. Do we continue to hold council meetings in these chambers with the rates so high?
Does anybody have any input on that? I think we've given everybody the option to have it in hybrid. Nobody has to be here and put themselves at risk. I think it's important, there's a sense of duty when you're in public service as we are to show up and operate. We don't want to put anybody health at risk, and that's why we have the option to be here or not. Certainly open the other opinions on that. Nobody else? I guess we're all here today. I'd like to hear anything from Jeannie, from Vice President Mock, from Dockler, from Mr. Weigel, Mr. Sandy? Or are you just gathering the information and getting ready for next time, and working this week, or what's the?
Mayor Bochensky, I'll be very brief. If we're voting on something tonight, I'll have to have Mr. Weber go through it again, just because I don't recall what he'd brought up. I know the state of Minnesota has had a mask mandate for quite some time, and I don't know the specific time. But one thing I would bring up, and this is from a NPR news article that came out today, and it said that the highest single-day increase was on Thursday when the Minnesota Department of Health reported 1,158 new cases. That day's report was skewed by the addition of results from a backlog at one Twin Cities testing lab. But state health officials said Saturday's 1,032 confirmed cases did not include any of the backlogged results. It was not immediately clear whether any of the backlog reflected was in Sunday's report. So even though Minnesota has had a mask mandate, and I know it's been mentioned multiple times tonight with no formal motion, Minnesota is still continuing to see, they just set their record yesterday, and they've had a mask mandate. So I'm not completely convinced in the city of Grand Forks that it will work. I think at the university, where you've got thousands of people in classrooms running around places, I think it's more acceptable, and I understand it why they're doing it there. They've got a lot of young people that, as we may know, may not always make the best decisions, so I think it's more fitting. But when we talk about the city as a whole, I'm not so sure that it's best for the city of Grand Forks to have that mask mandate. Minnesota has had one. They're still seeing record numbers of cases. And I also largely wonder about the enforcement process. Is there a fine that's associated with it? Is it a misdemeanor? What is our plan if that continues to be brought up? What are we looking at for that? And who's going to enforce it? Something I would be more supportive of is that if people have tested positive and they know that they are positive and yet they continue to walk around our city, I would be supportive of enforcement action there. Because I have seen it where I've received messages where somebody has tested positive for it. They have posted on social media that I have tested positive for it, but yet I get pictures of them leaving their apartment building and driving with somebody else. I get pictures of them walking back into the apartment building. So if we're going to do something, or what I've seen people elaborate as penalizing them by making them wear a mask, let's penalize the people that aren't doing things the right way, that are continuing to go out into our community when they know they are positive. I'd like more of an approach that way versus an approach for everybody to wear a mask. But I'm open to listen to what others may have to say as well.
If I may, Mr. Mayor. First of all, single-day factors should never guide policy. In fact, the public health officer's dashboard, specifically, Mr. Dewis, correct me if I'm wrong, we specifically look at a 7-day average because you can have testing fluctuations that skew the data. So it's important to always use a 7-day average rather than a 1-day record to guide policy. As far as UND having a unique environment, Mr. Mayor, I think you recognized with your decision this weekend that we owe it to our institutional partner, President Armacost and the university, to create support and recognition that those students may be expected to act one way on campus, but all of those efforts are lost if we allow them to come into the community and act in a different way. In terms of support for quarantine, I wouldn't have any problem with that. I don't know that we have any less problem or struggle trying to enforce that. I don't think Chief Nelson wants his people out doing that. Again, I come back to the public education. And does public education change everything overnight? No. No. In fact, people are going to be more influenced by their neighbors, their social circle, than what they see from any leading authority. It takes time, it's a cumulative effect. We need a public health campaign, a public education campaign, long-term. And that would go for mask wearing and the need to quarantine. I think that it's important to do what we can from a policy perspective to support the work that's being done at UND. I don't have the specifics on how we would do that. And I haven't advocated, I still haven't advocated for an explicit mask mandate. I'm simply pointing out that it's worked in many other places, that it is possible, that it has worked, and that it could, some form of that could work here. But mandate or strong encouragement, frankly, I don't think they're that much different if we have a strong public education campaign to support that strong encouragement. Without that public education campaign, strong encouragement is just words.
Mayor Buczynski, just real quick, Mr. Weber, you're right about the 7-day rolling average, and I've got a graph on here that I can show you later, but the 7-day rolling average does show it continuing to go up in Minnesota. For our city attorney, I guess I would ask you to look into, I know the governor had an executive order, and maybe Ms. Swanson or Mr. Dulitz can elaborate on this, but I believe that it wasn't a police issue, but it was a public health issue, and that based on the governor's executive order, that the state or the public health director could move forward with some type of investigation and essentially have that person charged if the prosecuting attorney chose to do so. And maybe that's just a kind of a roundabout way.
I think Ms. Swanson's coming up, so.
Mayor
Please.
Buczynski, members of the council, Mr. Weigel, if you are referring to our powers to enforce quarantine and isolation, yes, we do have some public health authority to do that. That is within our purview. It's easier to do for isolation because of the definite threat to the public. It's a little harder to do for quarantine. Quarantine is a perception that that person can become infected during that 14-day period. We have, and we do, enforce it when we have enough information to follow through with that. We start out with a fairly light touch, sending letters to individuals, following up with them. If we have definite evidence that they're not following isolation, we can follow up with a legal process, but I will tell you this, it takes time, and most people who are on isolation, if they don't become very ill and continue to shed the virus, it's only 10 days, and sometimes we're not able to do that within that 10-day period. But we have proceeded with it. It's a little bit easier to do if a law enforcement officer actually observes it and has knowledge of it. But if that answers your question.
It does, yes, thank you. Mr. Gosted, if you have anything to add.
I do. Okay. Your question is actually quite timely because this afternoon before I came here, I had a conversation with State's Attorney Haley Wamstead on this very issue, discussing the process and about seeing somebody that may be under a quarantine and some legal process that could be done. You don't see it the one time where somebody is out, but there may be multiple times, and we discussed it very briefly today because she was asking questions about some other orders that had been issued, and that topic was brought up, and we both acknowledged that we'd be discussing it in the next several days about how to do something like that if it's even possible.
Perfect, thank you.
Minnesota's mandate is a Class B misdemeanor with a $100 fine. I don't know about enforcement mechanisms. When I've been in East Grand Forks, I haven't seen any masked police walking around. So, but it seems that mask adherence is higher in those states where there is a mandate.
I think if we talk about masks here and you look at around town, and where would a mask mandate really make a difference? UND has a mask policy on campus. Public schools have mask policy in their buildings. They have the authority to do that. A lot of private businesses are requiring masks as you enter. Employees are wearing them within City Hall. Where is the spread actually happening? It's happening at house parties. There's 15 of the 20 frats that are on quarantine. There's bars. We've put an order on to help slow that. How we're going to get into homes and, this isn't, I don't want to use the term, but this isn't Nazi Germany where we can bust into houses and force people to wear masks. That's where the spread is happening. Now, to me, I'm not sure that a mandate is going to get them to suddenly say, well, now we better wear a mask when we're partying together, because this final entity has told us that we have to. I have said that I think masks help. If you use them correctly when you are sitting down very close to somebody, they can help to prevent the spread. There's no doubt. It's not a guarantee either. But putting this, it seems like it's come to the point where we need to have a mandate as education, now we're saying we've stepped it up to the next level. To me, if we're using it, it needs to be used to actually combat something. That's why, you talk about us putting this, setting the standard, letting people know. But this was as far as the bar closures at 11 p.m., this was a very targeted and measured effort to fight against something that's a clear and definite spreading place. I think these types of measures make a lot more sense than just dropping this on so that we can say that we have a mask mandate now, because we don't have there's no proof that we're going to make a difference based on all the rest of the things going on. And another big concern of mine is just COVID fatigue. And the fact that people are going to get so fed up if they're told now they got to wear a mask. They might wear a mask all day at work, and then they get outside and they want to walk around outside, and they're in public, and now people are going to get burnt out, and then they're going to start not wearing masks at places where they need to be wearing them. And that's a big issue that's going around the country as well. So as far as your public information push, I'm certainly on board for that. I have been for a long time. I think it's worth pushing harder at this point, definitely. But I haven't from the start, and I'm still not there for a mask mandate.
My recommendations, Mr. Mayor, were public education, maintaining the current dashboard, and looking at how our risk protocols are going to translate into policy. So we're on board. We're on the same page.
Sounds good. Was there any other input from other council members? Oh, Ms. Mock's been sitting patiently and quietly, so please.
Yeah, so you did decide to issue an executive order. Maybe you were thinking about that for a long time, and I didn't realize you were. What went into that decision, and do you have maybe other policy ideas that you're thinking on? Because I think, to Mr. Veen's point earlier, it would be nice to have a plan where perhaps that is laid out so that we know, or maybe that level is indicated for what the decision-making factor may be for you to issue something similar, or for it to just go into effect if we hit a point.
I think there's certainly a number of data points that are moving around that are difficult to peg down exactly what we want to do, as Mr. Phelan said. So if we decided we were in orange right now, that means that we're shutting down bars, restaurants, gyms, everything there. What went into this? We had a great roundtable discussion. It was something that had been talked about widely for many, many weeks on early bar closures. And when I had that 2.5-hour discussion, got an opportunity to talk to Dr. Birx, talk to the governor, about many different mitigation efforts that can help. And in our college town, with the spread being the way it is, I felt that was a mitigation effort that was a good compromise to keep businesses open, but to help stem the spread. So rather than wait for another Saturday, the first Saturday of school going on, I felt it was my duty to act on that. So it was very, as Mr. Weber said, it would be great to be able to have all these levels, and then this happens at this level, but there's too much data that's moving. I think the point is that I am willing to act when it's necessary.
Well, I do think it is a little perhaps confusing then that we would have the health officer's dashboard have the same colors, perhaps. I guess because we have the governor's guidelines, and then if we're saying we're in orange based on our own numbers, I don't know if we need to adjust those or maybe change the colors so that it's supplementary. It just seems a little confusing that the governor has us in green then, but we're calling ourselves orange, but we're following green guidelines. Maybe there's something in there that we could clarify.
Well, I think that, yeah, the numbers are largely nominal. I don't know that they're not attached to the governor's numbers, so I think it was just a level that was set. I don't know what the exact, I mean, Mr. Weber might know better than I do on that.
I think Mayor Paczynski and Council Vice President Mock, I think the colors are the same. Certainly the governor's guidelines on his metrics on how he determines whether you're green, yellow, orange, red are different how he determines that. And I think to the expert panel, I think and Mr. Weber read it very well. It's very nuanced. It's a tool to use. And as public health professionals often do, because they want to go to the extreme. If your hospital goes to red, that means it doesn't matter if all the indicators are green. We have to do something. On the counter to that, because we're in yellow and maybe we're even in green at the hospital, depending on how you want to look at it. Let's say it's in yellow, greenish yellow. That means we have capacity there. That overrides the fact that maybe orange isn't quite orange to the counter to that, what they're saying. So to the mayor's point, it's very nuanced. Just is my opinion as a city administrator. My guess is that we're probably more in a yellow to where the governor is. And so when the governor is thinking about maybe some cities like Bismarck, Fargo, or I'll call it the counties that all these cities are thinking about moving to yellow, my guess is just intuitively, our orange is probably that yellow when you look at it. And so when he's thinking about moving us up to one, and when you go to yellow, that means, for instance, you go from 75% capacity in a bar to 50%. And when you go to really, yellow is kind of that middle area where if you look at the green and the yellow has a lot of, if you read through them, has a lot of indicators in there. So you can see yellow is kind of that midpoint. I think we're probably in that area. So if you wanted to target an area where we're really at and where the governor has publicly said, maybe 3 of these or 4 of these counties, or maybe I'm considering it, he hasn't done that, would be in yellow. And so that would be the color I would focus our energies and our analysis on.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Kwame, you've also been quiet.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I'd like to say first and foremost, I'd be supportive of a plan of action as long as it's one that relies on data and is supportive, I would say, number one, of keeping our schools and businesses open. I feel that I personally am not qualified to make that decision, but I would be supportive of something presented that is rooted in fact and not something that is a gut check or not something that is an opinion. But at this point, I'm still waiting to hear what that plan is, but I'm willing to hear it once we develop it further.
Ms. Stockler, you got anything for us?
Just a couple things, I promise. I don't remember who said it, but data points difficult to peg down. I think it's more difficult to make decisions when we are following the state guideline that puts us in green, and yet we've got our own situational awareness for Grand Forks and all of these other metrics. It's really confusing for me to follow along, let alone that's getting regular updates, as Councilman Weber pointed out earlier, as opposed to just a community member who's trying to keep up on their own and not getting all of these emails right when they come out at the same time. We need to work on a plan, just as Mr. Phelan said this week. I would appreciate if a plan was worked on to really kind of make that more clear. What is actually being used to drive our decisions on what we're keeping open, on what we're closing, on what we're putting at 75% or 25% or whatever it is. I think we need to make that more clear, because the common statement that I get from community members about all of this is we don't understand what's going on. Are we in the green? Are we in the yellow? Are we in the orange? What does that mean? They don't understand because it's not clear. It's hardly clear for all of us, let alone somebody who's not in all of these conversations all the time. And I think we really do a disservice to our community members by not doing that. And so a robust public health, conversation would be great in the community, but I do think that we need to make that clear for all of us as council members as well, as we look forward making policy and enacting it. I'd also like to talk about the enforcement of, let's say, bars. We're kind of picking on them right now because that's what we're doing right now. But if we're at a level at which they're only supposed to have 75%, and I have community members reaching out to me to say that, oh, the bar, I was there this weekend, it was just packed. I couldn't even walk through the thing without shouldering up to somebody. Or I have servers or bartenders reaching out to me saying that they've pretty much just given up on even trying to protect themselves at this point because the bar is so full and everybody is not even paying attention and their employers aren't either. What about the enforcement? If Walmart can have a clicker and Target can have a clicker to count to make sure that they're at a certain capacity, why can't the bars? To make sure that they themselves are policing themselves and doing their personal responsibility to make sure that they're keeping people safe. I guess I feel like that's a conversation that perhaps we need to have further, especially if we're going to try and lay all of the blame at the feet of young people. Because certainly I think in some ways the numbers for young people, they're getting tested at a more regular rate, especially if they're UND students or especially if they are teachers or paras within the school system. They're getting tested at a much higher and regular rate to catch their positives, as opposed to individuals that are going to the same places and not practicing social distancing or safe measures like mask wearing, and they're not getting tested. So those numbers perhaps stay false low. This isn't an easy conversation. There's no black or white answer, really. All of it is gray. And all the data that we're getting is constantly changing because who would have thought we'd have a pandemic in 2020? No one. And our responses to it, we have to be on our feet, as informed as possible, but at the same time, not afraid to take some action. I know that we need to look at the broader picture and how this implicates things. I don't want to make it more difficult for business owners in our community. If there's a way, again, that we can have prevention on the front end to save us a pound of cure in the long run, and that pound of cure is what is going to come too late for a lot of businesses and for people who lose their loved ones or people who die. Even though it may not be astronomical numbers, I am not comfortable to necessarily say, well, if there's only 25 kids in the school system of 7,000 in just Grand Forks Public School System that get sick with COVID and die, that's an entire classroom at my kid's school. I'm not comfortable saying that's the only way I'm going to determine whether or not we implement something. I don't think that should be our measure. And this is what we're toying with, it would seem. So I would appreciate more conversation moving forward on making our measures more clear. And I would appreciate more conversation on actually enforcing what should be enforced right now with possibly high hotspot places where people are getting in close contact with positives.
Thank you, Ms. Ackler. Are you willing to help do some of the planning and the work on that, or just wanting to vote on it?
I don't think that I've ever not been willing to do the work, just as I did the policy information and I sent it to Mr. Phelan on Tuesday right after our Monday meeting.
Okay.
Mayor Buchansky, I'm willing to work with enforcement and making the measures more clear, and I think if we can work with Mr. Gosted, and again, it's probably going to be, I think the governor keeps calling it being a good citizen, maybe a good small business owner, to making sure that they manage the situation so things don't get worse. So, one thing leads to another. And so we will have a discussion, come up with an action plan. If we could bounce that past you, Councilmember Docker, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Weber.
Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to put him on the spot, but I appreciate his attending this evening. I'm wondering if President Armacost would be willing to address us and give us an idea of what he might like to see from the city, if he's willing to do that. In other words, what can we do to support you, sir?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Get this masked here. Just a few thoughts. The first is, as the campus goes, the city goes. And as the city goes, the campus goes, right? There's not a boundary between the two. And as you've seen in the newspaper and heard from friends and colleagues, the situation on campus is one where positivity rates has increased dramatically over the last week and a half. We're testing at over 10% positivity rate, which on our own measures is cause for concern in that particular category. How do we get this under control? It's through testing, it's through quarantining, and through isolation. And on the front end of all of that is the idea of prevention and how we make sure that people are not transmitting the disease or the virus between each other. And we heard some of these steps mentioned earlier: hand washing, keeping a good distance from others, avoiding large gatherings, which we're getting to in some of the discussion tonight. And then in addition, wearing a face covering. And I think these are tried and true known methods for preventing transmission of the disease. The issue we face on campus, of course, is our rules only apply to what happens on campus. And Mary, you talked about what happens off campus and things like house parties and fraternity parties. We have no enforcement mechanism to make sure that our students are consistently abiding by the rules that we have on campus with what happens off campus. That is the jurisdiction of the city because they are residents of the city. And so I've said to many folks, both on council and to the mayor, that consistency between what we do on campus and off campus would help us enforce the behavior of this high-risk group of folks. And those high-risk group of folks also impact the most vulnerable on our campus: the staff members, the fraternity member, or the faculty members. And then in addition, unbeknownst to many of the age group from 18 to 22, people who are carrying around conditions that might make them more vulnerable than your typical at-a-glance student walking on our campus. And at some point we'll have to take action to make sure, if we're now, we were over 300 cases active on campus of COVID. We have currently over 700 cases of quarantine and isolation. At some point our systems can't handle that. Our resources can't handle that at that level. And given the restrictions that are put in place by the State Department of Health and the requirements that the Department of Health and the CDC expect us to follow, at some point we'll run out of resources potentially to handle that. Without the prevention steps up front, I fear that we will get there. And what I fear for the city is that when we, if we have to shut down the campus, our students go home, and the economic impact on the city is dramatic as well. So I want to avoid that. I want to keep the students in school. I want to keep the faculty working. I want to make sure we do it in a safe way, and that really benefits the city of Grand Forks. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I may. Mr. Phelan, your comments were an important wake-up call that the adoption of our own public health officer's dashboard, which seemed like such a great idea to me last week. Your reminder that if we really want that to mean something, one of the likeliest ways is to adopt the state's protocols for those colors. It doesn't need to be an exact fit, but it's a guide. And one of the things that I'm hoping is that we don't have to shut down UND. If we go from 75% occupancy to 50%, even 25% occupancy if necessary in our local bars and restaurants, other businesses, if we have to step up some of our other measures. And we do that for a week or 2 weeks or however long until we get the numbers back down. And that results in our keeping UND open. Nothing could be more important for our overall economy over the next few months, over the school year, future school years. This is a critically important consideration for us. And what I just heard is that it's difficult to, if not impossible, to enforce everything off campus, but the greater the degree of consistency between the two, this would be helpful and even necessary to keeping the university open. Thank you, President Armacost.
Any other council members at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I just have one comment. Without access and actual local data, City of Grand Forks data, I'm not in any position to make judgment on whether we should be implementing any requirements or not. I know that our local health department, which all work very hard providing information for us locally, I know that they have the data specific to the City of Grand Forks. I, for one, have been asking for weeks to get the specific data to the City of Grand Forks. I think at some point, if we want to implement any sort of measures locally, having actual data for the City of Grand Forks would be reasonable and relevant, and at which time I will consider any sort of implementation plan that others on the council might like to implement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
You got another one, Mr. Weber?
We have data. The public health officer's dashboard is not some made-up number. It may not be drawn on all the data that may be available. Well, it is, as I understand it. It's drawn on all that is available to us. On a daily basis, there's a variety of different data points go into determining that. This comment that I keep hearing that, well, when we have data, then we can make a decision. We get data every day. Is it perfect data? I don't know that there's such a thing as a perfect data set. As I understand it, it's the best data currently available to us. It looks relatively robust to me, based upon testing rates, infection rates, hospital capacity. There's these variety of factors going into it. We have data. I'm not proposing that we make decisions in some sort of vacuum. In fact, we don't just have data at the state level. We have, for the first time over the last few weeks, we have specific local data in the public health officer's dashboard. This isn't some made-up dream of mine. This is the public health department and the public health officer's dashboard. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor, just real quick.
Yeah.
Mr. Weber, I understand what you're saying. There is data there. But this body is in charge of making decisions for the City of Grand Forks, not the County of Grand Forks. We get the number of cases that are in Grand Forks County. Can you tell me how many are active in the city right now? Do you know that number?
I'll refer to Mr. Dulitz. I don't want to make a mistake. We have those numbers, and again, this data is available. You get it in your email every day. I don't believe I'm the only one receiving this information.
I did provide that, Mayor Botensky, members of the council. I did provide that data to Debbie and to City Administrator Phelan earlier this week, so you could look at it as a point in time. It is very time consuming to pull that data. What we saw was for Grand Forks County, outside of Grand Forks, the numbers were lower, but so basically also what it did was increase the numbers for Grand Forks, so the rates per 100,000, things like that, because we had less population. But, we are getting more data in Grand Forks than any other location in the state. And we've spent a lot of time trying to get that data. So we're doing our best to try and make things as informed as possible for you.
And we have that data due to the diligence of Mr. Dulitz, the diligence of Ms. Swanson, but also, Mr. Sandy, I believe we have that data because you have been pushing and pushing and pushing. And so, again, this notion that we have to wait until we have data is just maddening to me.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Please,
Mr. Weber, I think you are wildly missing my point. Regardless of what that data says, whether it's better or worse, it is our data. It is the data specifically related to the people that we represent that elected us to be here today, that elected us to make these difficult decisions. We have the data available. Apparently, it's very hard to get our hands on it. We have $3.6 million from the state. I suggested last week that we hire somebody to get us the data, to mine the data. I don't know what more I can do because I've been asking, and again, are very fine people that work in public health, that work very hard, that are providing and doing their due diligence to the best of their capabilities, apparently haven't been given the resources by the city or the county to run a report out of a software system. So I would simply suggest that we should get that data before we make any specific decisions about the people of Grand Forks that will affect their daily lives. That is all. Thank you.
Ms. Swanson, did you want to add to that? I know we're in the process of hiring, and hiring people's been pretty difficult at this time, but please.
Mr. Botensky, members of the council, Mr. Sandy, with all due respect, the data is data that's generated from the dynamic system, which is owned by the state of North Dakota. That's the information that I believe you're asking for to separate city and county. County level data is public. It's reported on the state's website. It's reported to the CDC. It's the standard for reporting data across the nation. Everywhere you will see county level data. It's very rare that you will see city level unless a specific city health department is collecting it on their own, which we are not. We're using the state health department. The information that Michael provided that he mentioned was very time-consuming, comes out of our contact tracing software, and therein lies our issue with releasing it because that is part of a contact tracing system and that information is private. So it's not like we don't want to provide it. We have some restrictions on what we can do, and it's not a capacity issue, although this has been very time-consuming. It is truly a privacy issue. When you talk about data for Grand Forks County, the numbers might be fairly small, in which case now you're getting down to identifiable information. So I think that's a concern that we have as a health department because we want to protect the integrity of our contact tracing system because it is so very crucial to our overall mitigation efforts, is finding, testing people, tracing, isolating, quarantine. So I just have to reiterate that. I've asked Michael to do a lot of work on behalf of our department for data collection. It is absolutely true that we are the only other county in the state that's doing this at this specific level to develop a dashboard for decision making. And if I could, while I have the podium, if I could just offer up also some information you may not be aware of relative to public education. We asked the state to roll out a very robust public education campaign They had to go through an RFP process, and they said it would be mid-September before that was available. We didn't feel that that was soon enough for our community, so we started to do some public education. We've been educating from day one through our social media, both the city website as well as ours on all of our social media accounts. But we recognize not everybody has internet access, and they may need other ways to receive that information. So we started billboard campaign, print ads, and we'll also be doing some electronic media that would be on television or radio. So just so you know, we're using some of our CARES funding for a public education campaign as well. Thank you for the opportunity to add another comment.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I-
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, well, I know this is meant to be a work session, but let's try to keep our, voices down and proper and respectful to everybody. So please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Sandy, so is the concern that there would be a dramatic difference between the county data and the city data? Because what I'm hearing is that that's the kind of the roadblock here.
I think as somebody who studied mathematics in college, taught statistics at the university, I know a little bit about statistics, not unlike yourself, Professor Weber, who spends a lot of time doing research and putting together statistical information. I think a rudimentary statistician knows that if you add 25% to the population, you can statistically significantly change the results that are found when you're doing your testing. Do you agree with that, Mr. Weber?
I would, but I also recognize that, and this is being pursued by the Policy Institute on campus, there's an interesting dynamic that isn't fully understood yet between outlying communities and urban centers like Grand Forks. So I don't know that, while there would be a statistically significant distinction between those populations if they were isolated, the reality is that we are, like with our partners in East Grand Forks, we are two cities but one community. In many ways, all of the communities of Grand Forks County, because so many do their shopping here, they're dependent upon us for groceries and other commerce, I don't see how breaking out those numbers would be significantly distinct to change policy decisions.
I think you're welcome to your opinion. My opinion is the significance, I believe, is great enough that it may actually have a significant impact to the point where we may actually be saying that we disagree with the governor's recommendations at his colors. We may want to take additional action, but I don't know for sure because I don't have the data. Perhaps I misunderstood Ms. Swanson when we had the conversation last week, and she said, we have the data, it's a manpower issue. Today she said, we have the data, it's not a manpower issue, it's a contact tracing and personal health issue. That is not the message that was delivered when we had a conversation last week. I will certainly take that into consideration when we are continuing our discussion.
And my apologies for earlier. My concern is that this waiting for perfect data leaves us in a policy vacuum, and that we need to move forward with decision-making with the best data available.
And that is 100% correct. We need to do the best we can with the data that's available. I'm asking for the best data for the city of Grand Forks. What I've been told today is different than what I had been told in the past. And so perhaps at another meeting, we can further this discussion.
Mr. Veen, did you have something?
I do. I think I'm grateful for having the meeting today to get more information out and start this process. I'm probably a little bit discouraged in that I want to see us actually develop a plan. We talked about that and there's a lot of reasons why we're not, but how are we going to get to the plan so that we can keep our residents informed about what to expect for the future? And and I mean, I understand better today the dashboards. The state has a different dashboard than the city has. Doesn't mean either of them are wrong. It's just that the state dashboard covers the entire state, and we're more specific for Grand Forks. And I think that gives us policymakers better information. We'll never ever have 100% of the information to make a decision. We're lucky if we get 20 or 25% typically is all we're going to ever have. And we got to use what we've got, or else we will be waiting forever to make a decision. So we've got what we've got. Whether it's statistically significant or not, or how far off it is, I guess we'll find that out. But in the meantime, I want to keep our businesses open. I want to keep us, I like what we just heard from the president here about trying to work together. It isn't one or the other. What are we doing here to help each other? We need the university needs us. How do we make sure our plans align? And what should that plan be? And they're going to say at some point they have to send their students home. We can't afford to let that happen. So if we wait and keep discussing and don't put a plan into place, it won't be a perfect plan, but at least we need a plan that people can fall back on. And we can't continue to wait, is all I'm saying, to do that. And if we do, what are we going to have next week that we don't have today? Well, I think we can do quite a bit of work in a week, but what's that going to be? I mean, I think we need to have a plan next week that's ready to be implemented, maybe even right or wrong, but at least we've done something instead of just sitting and talking. And that's where I think we need to be. And our yellow can be completely different than the state's level. If that's confusing, let's use a number system, let's do whatever it is. But we can clearly identify we're not following the state's precise mechanism or means because we have a different rating system than they do. But how do we get this done so we can move forward? And I think the longer we talk, the longer we procrastinate, the more risk we're putting our citizens in place to have what we just talked about is unintended consequences of shutting schools, shutting businesses down.
Thank you. Jeannie? Ms. Mock?
Well, I do agree. I don't think any of us want businesses shut down, but I also don't want schools shut down and UND and all of these institutional partners. Frankly, we don't want to issue with Altru and to have the hospital overrun because we'd like Altru to continue being able to offer routine procedures and screenings and all the healthcare services we need without a pandemic going on. So we do hear from other people who see the numbers spike and they want immediate action and they want implementation of certain policies. And I think, even if it's not perfect, if we had it planned out, you give everyone kind of a gauge on where they are. So if you are of the mindset that this is, very, very serious and impactful, then you have an idea of where we're going. And when you see a spike, this is where the city is going with their policies. If you're of the mindset that, statistically you're not likely to get this, and even if you do, you're very likely to survive, then at least this is what it's based on. We're not overreacting to a one-day high. We're reacting to a series of measures. I think that if we react with a series of measures, then we're not overreacting with one data point, because I don't want to be overreactionary, but I think it would make everyone feel more secure if there was more of a plan in place. Now, I'm not exactly sure how to help with that. I certainly am willing to. I'm certainly willing to take any information the city may want to give and just provide impact. I can go either way. I just think that if a worst case scenario is closing businesses, then let's work backwards from there, because certainly closing the bars at 11 is better than closing them altogether. And that was a policy directive. So, maybe there are other ways that we can approach the problem. If you don't want schools to close, we look at that and we work backwards from keeping schools open or keeping businesses open, and we set our policy goals that way so that we're trying to achieve that end goal of keeping everything functioning as best we can.
Well, I mean, is the policy, is the ask that you want the city to make the policy and then you can decide on it, or where do you want to start, I guess is the question, because everyone wants this and they don't have the path to it. I mean, as policymakers, you're setting the policy for the city to enforce, but are you wanting, or is the ask that the city comes up with a policy and then you can decide if it's good and change it, or what is the ask, I guess?
The ask is to take the governor's smart restart and look at how it could be applied to our local public health officers' risk level assessment. And a quick comment on data. This is from the governor's smart restart plan. He refers to the iceberg metaphor. At best, the data that we have, county, or if we're able to get it down to the city, is going to be just the tip of the iceberg. And the estimates are that the number of actual cases are many, many times more than are indicated by testing results. So there's never going to be a perfect data set, and this is recognized in the governor's smart restart under the iceberg metaphor he refers to in measures and tools. But for now, yes, what I'm hoping that we could discuss next week is some proposal for a fit between our current public health officer's dashboard and the protocols set by the governor. And again, the public health officer's dashboard is not a single data point. This is a combination of factors weighted according to some expert consideration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments or motions at this point?
Mayor?
Yeah, Mr. Bean.
I don't know if we're looking for motion, but do we kind of just maybe have an understanding of where could you just kind of reiterate where you think we're at so that we don't come back in a week and think, oh, that isn't where we at? Can we maybe define that, make sure we all go away with the same things in mind?
Yeah, the motion I was referring to was to adjourn, but I believe we are going to work on a specific proposal for a strong, robust, and active public information campaign, maintain the public health dashboard, the officer's dashboard, but with some adjustments now. And we'll be seeking guidance from public health, and I'll have staff working on that for your viewing next council meeting, and to continue and analyze, well, this is kind of number 3 is along the same lines with analyzing what green, yellow, orange, and red mean versus what the governor's green, yellow, orange, and red mean. Am I missing anything?
No, and I'm guessing from that would come the other decision based upon how we align our risk level assessment with the governor's smart restart protocols.
Yeah.
That would give us some indication of whether or not we should continue holding council meetings in council chambers for now. That would be part of that overall set of decisions.
Then Ms. Dockler also talked about enforcement of these issues at the bars and other places. So you got those written down, Todd?
I have 5 things written down, and so I agree with you. Public education campaign, the health officer's dashboard, use of the colors with the policies integrated with the governor's restart, measures more clear, and I think that went into the colors, so we're still at 3. And then 4th, we have to enforce whether we're in green, yellow, we got to enforce and come up with some sort of mechanism to include just being good business and good citizens following the rules. And if we've all gotten lax on that, we need to reinforce, even if we say we're in green. Green has consequences, and so we need to move forward with that. I think Mayor Baczynski will need to work with you. A lot of the emergency orders, I dare say, need to come from you likely as emergency orders, and so that's the quickest way we get to action. And so I think we'll have to have some deep discussions, and whatever we can do to engage with council members on what their thoughts on, we'll try to do that this week.
And I think the biggest thing with council is engage Mr. Phelan, engage Mr. Gosted. If you have questions, if you have, anything, I think picking up the phone and making a phone call, gets us a long way in between, rather than trying to iron it all out here. So that'd be my recommendation as well. Do we have, Mr. Bean?
Well, I just want to say I'm very encouraged by where we are today with having a really good, thorough discussion, being able to address the issues that we want. We've talked about, we've not all been inclusive in like this to be able to have the discussion. So I want to thank you for that. I'll thank everybody for their input, because that's what's going to make us better. I'd also like to say thank you to the Health Department. I think having worked here starting in 1984, the leadership of the Health Department today is better than it's been in any of those years since then. And I think the dedication we have from all the staff members there has been exceptional too. And I don't know if we always realize how lucky we are. It's very complex today. It's not an easy thing to do. But I want to at least say my thanks for the work that they've done. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, at the end, this is hard. These decisions are hard. This is tough. It isn't easy. In 10 years, we'll be able to look back, and I think hopefully we'll be able to say that we did a pretty good job. We did the best we could with what we had at the time. But we're here, and it's now. So thanks, everybody, for their hard work. Do we
Move to adjourn?
we have a motion?
Sorry.
I was actually just going to say, I want to talk about one more thing and just say, just kidding. I'll make a motion to adjourn. So if you'd like to second, Mr. Weber.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are adjourned.